Hello and welcome to part 2 of the comprehensive guide to the self-treatment of patella maltracking. Many people who've been diagnosed with patella maltracking or you might just be feeling knee pain in general, a lot of the time they don't necessarily know what the actual biological cause of that pain is. Why is it hurting? It's pretty much always it's a mechanical problem. The body is a machine. It's the bones and joints. You can think of them as like say metal rods and a hinge, and the muscles are just like pistons or whatnot that are moving those hinges. And when those pistons aren't moving properly and those hinges aren't moving properly, they hurt. That's the difference between humans and machines. Whereas machines just break down, but actually human beings break down as well. But what's going on particularly with patella maltracking is an imbalance problem. So the muscles in the quadriceps muscle, the upper thigh, you've got the muscles on the inside of the quad called the vastus medialis muscles, and then the muscles on the outside of the quad, which are the vastus lateralis muscles. Now those two muscles tug on the patella tendon. So some will be pulling it up and this way, and then the outer ones will be pulling it out and this way. And then so the kneecap will, if one side is tighter, it'll be pulling the kneecap out in one particular direction. So if this here, my hand and these two fingers, if this is to represent the end of your thigh bone, your femur, and these are called the condyles of the femur. Ideally, your patella, which is your kneecap, which is represented by these two fingers, should run smoothly down the middle of that groove. What happens in most cases where somebody's got patella maltracking is the lateral quad, the outer quad, is tighter and stronger than the medial quad, the inner quad, which is weak and underused. So the patella there starts to get pulled outside, it gets pulled laterally, and then instead of going smoothly in this gap, it rubs hard against the outside, and that's where you feel the pain. And if the outer quad is really, really tight, the patella will get pulled laterally so much that the kneecap can't even dislocate, and then the problems just get worse and worse. So the question becomes, and this is what this series answers, is how do you stop that imbalance from occurring, and what causes that imbalance from occurring? It's important for you to understand why some muscles can get knotted up and tight and shortened. For patella maltracking sufferers, the main culprit for that will be the vastus lateralis, the outer quad muscle. That's the one that gets knots in it gets tight, it gets short. But why does that happen? Well, why does a muscle get tight? What's that all about? Well, it's actually it's an evolutionary survival mechanism that goes on. And if you imagine a particular muscle is being worked and worked and worked, perhaps being worked in a way that it's too much for it, that the muscle can't handle the amount of work it's being asked. So in that respect, there's a risk that muscle will be overworked to the point where it will tear and it will damage. So what the body does, and it's clever like this, it needs to protect that muscle. So what it will do is it sends a permanent nervous impulse to certain sections of the muscle, usually midway along the muscle belly, which tells them to permanently contract and just lock into a contraction. Okay, that's what the knot is. If you feel a knot in a muscle, that's a permanent contraction that's constantly switched on. Now, the effect of having a knot there, a permanent section of the muscle which is shortened, is the entire length of the muscle itself becomes shortened, because if a section is shortened, the muscle is shortened. So when it's shortened like that, that means it's going to be tighter. When the muscle's tighter, it'll be pulling more on the joint that it's supposed to act. So the tighter it'll be pulling on that joint, the closer the space between the bones in that joint will be. Therefore, that joint will feel stiffer. As that joint is stiff, you're not going to want to use it. So as you're now you don't want to use that joint, you're not going to be using that muscle either. So what the body has done there, it is, in an indirect kind of way, it stopped you from using that muscle that it felt you were using too much and was at risk of damage. Now that muscle is not going to get damaged because you're not moving it. Now, yeah, that's great in some ways. That's all very well if you're an animal and you don't really have any brain and you didn't understand why that injury occurred. But as human beings, we'd like to think we're a bit more intelligent, and we actually know why a certain muscle got strained. Let's imagine it could have been a one-off strain, like in a sporting event, or walking up a set of stairs funny, or picking up a box in a funny way that had strained that muscle. So we know we're not going to constantly try and pick up that box in a funny way. So there's no risk that we're going to try and do that thing again. So we don't need this protection mechanism coming in here and telling us to shorten this muscle and make the joint hurt. So we want the joint to not hurt anymore. So what we need to do is we need to go to that part of the muscle that's in a permanent contraction like that, and we need to stop it from being in a permanent contraction. If we stop that piece of muscle from being in a permanent contraction, the muscle will restore its proper length, the joint will stop being pulled tight and stiff, and it will restore its proper function, and then that joint won't be painful and stiff anymore, it will move properly. So how do you stop this permanent contraction? You do it through mechanical pressure or massage. So when you massage one of these knots, it just breaks it down, and that nervous impulse to that muscle switches off. And all sorts of good things happen when that nervous impulse switches off. The waste products that have got caught in that can now flow out, and blood that hasn't been able to enter that section of the muscle for a long time can now flow in and start to heal those areas of the muscle. So in the next section of the video, part 3, foam rolling, we're going to show you methods to, on your own, apply mechanical pressure to those knots to switch those knots off. And it's probably quite important that you do it on your own, because you're going to have a lot of knots. You're going to have a lot of knots to switch off. If you've got fabulous amounts of money, probably the best thing for you to do is go and have professionals break down those knots for you. That's fine. But with me, I had so many knots that I literally needed to be trying to break down those knots 2 to 3 times a day, every day. If I had the money to see a professional 2 to 3 times a day, every day, I would have done, but I didn't. So I used foam rolling instead, which is actually quite effective. The sections in the video that will help to cure this problem are as follows. Part 3 of the series looks at something called foam rolling, which is a type of self-massage. It's a type of self-massage which aims to break down knots in muscles which cause the tightness in those muscles. So, for instance, if you're suffering from patella-femoral, your vastus lateralis will be tight and knotted. So we'll look at, in that part 3, ways to break down those knots in the vastus lateralis and then help the kneecap track better. Later on in this section, I also explain what causes a knot and what actually is happening biologically. And when you understand that, it will make a little bit more sense. Then in part 4, we look at a special stretch for the lower leg for patella-femoral sufferers. Now, it's a special stretch for patella-femoral sufferers because a lot of the time, the reason people get patella-femoral is because when their knee moves, it caves inside the foot. So their knee goes to the inside of the foot. If you see a patella-femoral sufferer try to squat, the likelihood is that their knees will cave in, right? So this stretch that we look at in part 4 teaches you and stretches you in how to push the knees to the slight outside edge of the foot, and you'll see how that becomes useful in parts 5, 6 and 7, where we need to work on pushing the knees out. So what is part 5? Part 5 is an exercise called sissy squats. If you're to only pick one part of this video series, because you can't be bothered to watch all of it, just watch part 5. It's the single best exercise for directly addressing the patella-femoral problem. And you'll see within that how that helps switch off the tight vastus lateralis and how it switches on the weak vastus medialis and gets that kneecap tracking properly. As I said, part 5 is the number one exercise, but you would be mistaken to just skip and just look at that one exercise. As I said at the start, patella maltracking is a problem that happens from a range of movement imperfections, and the knees caving in is just one of those, and we can help fix that through parts 6 and 7, which go on to look at the unweighted and weighted squats respectively. There's a special type of squat in there. It's a remedial type of squat for patella maltracking sufferers, because I know when my patella maltracking was at its worst, if somebody had asked me to do a squat, I really wouldn't have wanted to do it. It would have been far too painful. But there's ways of doing it and introducing it and making it easy on the knees to begin with, and then gradually sort of increasing the amount of strain that you put through the knees as the knees become less painful and stronger. So that's part 6 and 7, the unweighted and the weighted squat. Part 8 looks at some exercises for the abdomen. Basically it works on how to control the angle of our pelvis, which is very important for overall body movement. And then part 9 is what I call a wrap up and programming section, and it tells you how to incorporate all the exercises within this series in order to fix your knees.